For those of you who don't already know me or any of our guest speaker this evening, my name is Dr. David Schweibish. I am currently the treasurer of the Florida Podiatric Medical Association, and I'm joined this evening by a very special guest and a very dear friend of the Florida Podiatric Medical Association, Cindy Pezza, who is the president and CEO of Pinnacle Practice Achievement, which for those of you who are not aware of that organization, is basically the right hand for many doctors across this country who practice within the profession of podiatry, whether from the very, very earliest part of practice, right out of residency, to very senior doctors at all stages in their career, whether they're in private practice, group practice, hospital practice, you name it. Cindy's worked with these folks. We've had the pleasure in the FPMA of having her integrate into our annual SAM conference in January or February of every year. And very recently, she's brought in some incredibly engaging lectures and some kind of workshops that have been immensely valuable to a lot of practitioners across the state of Florida. So we're very, very pleased to have her on this call this evening. The talk for the night is going to be basically, what are you going to do with the future? It's coming quickly, and I'm just looking through the participant lists. We've got a mix of some younger practitioners on. We've got some residents. Some I see here. One is a first year, looks like, at Oak Hill. So glad to have you on board. Glad to see that you're thinking ahead very early. But what we'll do is we'll go ahead and get this thing kicked off, because we're going to try to make this as much of a discussion as a presentation. So if we can move forward to the next slide, we'll get this thing rolling.
Sure. Thank you so much for that kind introduction. So yes, I've been in this field since my baby was 6 months old. My baby will be 20 years old on April 14th this year. So it's been 2 decades that I've been working with podiatrists in some way, shape, or form. So, in the past 5, 6, 7 years, I've been working with startups, and it's been very interesting just in that short period of time, the changes that have taken place in healthcare that affect existing practices and existing physicians, but these new doctors that are coming out to figure out what they want to do with the rest of their career. So here are the options. And there may be more options than this, but sort of these are the 4 top. So joining an existing private practice as an associate, with or without partnership potential. I've spoken to many associates who were promised, maybe not in writing, but promised partnership at the beginning of employment, and 1 year turns into 3, 3 into 5, 5 into 7, and they call me and say, I don't think it's going to happen. So that's its own little conundrum in its own. Then there's fellowship, offering even more specialized surgical experience and enhanced credentials, which you feel like should really make you more attractive as an employee / partner in a practice or hospital position. The third, become employed by a hospital system. And the last, starting your own practice from scratch, maybe partner up, or acquire an existing practice. So when should you start thinking about post-residency planning? I get calls from residents that are months, sometimes weeks away from being done with residency, and they say, like, hey, I'm so excited. I found you online and I talked to all these people and you helped them, and okay, yeah, I want to do that. I want to open my own practice. And I hate to burst their bubble, but this takes a lot of planning and some time. So I think you should start thinking about what your plan is after residency during the final months of your first year as a resident, but definitely not during the last months when you're going to make a rush decision because you need a job. And that usually doesn't work out very well. Dr. Schweibish, any anecdotes? So when Dr. Schweibish and I were like planning this together, I said, I'm going to give my experience. You give your anecdotes from you and your colleagues and your friends and your experience of what happened?
Yeah, so I mean, you hit the nail on the head by saying that those that failed to plan ahead are the ones that really ultimately fail in the end. I mean, and it's no different for those of you who are on the call. You know, when you were thinking about planning for residency, if you know those people who waited to the last minute to figure out their clerkships and waited to the last minute to submit applications, they're the ones who typically didn't get where they wanted to be. And it's really no different when you're going into practice right from residency or from fellowship. My wife and I were, we'd actually met when we were back in high school. So we'd kind of been through the whole podiatry process together, going through school together at Scholl College. We both graduated in 2015, both went to residency actually together in the same program, which was really not planned that way at all, and finished residency in 2018. And in 2018, we were not at all behind the eight ball because we knew, even when we were actually still in school, that we wanted to be in practice for ourselves. And so we started setting up those, kind of getting that process rolling. And whether we were starting from scratch or acquiring a practice or whatever, we knew we had to figure out a lot of the details that we're going to discuss tonight on this presentation. For us, we knew that probably the easiest path would be to acquire a practice. And we started putting those wheels in motion right around the time we started residency. So we'll talk about that more as we kind of get further into the presentation.
And it's funny you should say that you had these ideas and started making these plans back in podiatry school. And I've traveled to quite a few different schools and lectured to, you know, second, third, even sometimes fourth years. And there's only a small percentage that are not rolling their eyes at me. And, you know, I kind of learned early on not to take it personally, you know, but it is that certain small percentage that's paying attention, that's taking notes, that's making sure they're putting my email and cell phone number in their phone, like right then, you know, second, third, or fourth year. Those are the ones that keep in contact with me. Those are the ones that I've helped open practices or buy a practice and then revamp everything. But they were paying attention to the details that their colleagues were not, where they were rolling their eyes and thinking, what does that have to do with me? And as you found out, and your wife found out, a lot, actually, it has a lot to do with what you went through and what you were going to face in the future.
That's for sure.
Right. So first things first, decide where to do it. I cannot tell you how many conversations I've had with young practitioners who say that they want to open their practice, even ones that say like, okay, I'm a third year, or I'm a second year or whatever. And okay, where would you like to open a practice? And they say, well, I don't really care, just wherever, doesn't matter. Like they're actually going to take a map of the United States and throw a dart and say like, there it is, there's where I'm practicing, middle of nowhere, America. And that's not a good idea. So a lot of times when I consult with people, with doctors, I get really personal with them as far as, you know, what kind of climate do they like? What activities do they like? What are their extracurricular activities? Like, do they like to hike or ski, or do they hate the cold weather, or do they love to go snorkeling, or, you know, where is their family from? Where is their support system? And that's so important that we incorporate the touchy-feely part of where does your heart want to be? Where do you want to call home? So location. It's not just for beach property that you're investing in, okay? It's for where you want to be and where you want to be part of the community that you practice in. So I guess, Dr. Schweibish, this would, for you and your wife, like for all through residency, like in podiatry school, you're in, you know, cold climate. You're in like the Windy City, right? So why did you decide that you wanted to come back to Florida?
So for us, there and a lot of those warm, fuzzy, touchy-feely kind of sensations you were talking about were really the things that were at the heart of our discussion. I mean, we did go to school in at Shoal in Chicago and had plenty of years of cold weather, and we did discuss actually staying in Chicago to practice. But we're both originally from Florida. We both grew up in Daytona Beach, and that's where our family largely is located, at least our immediate family. And so it felt right. And we knew a lot of people. We had a lot of good contacts in Florida. And especially for us wanting to take over an existing practice, which we ultimately got to that decision, it made more sense because of those contacts. But really, the heart of it all was that we knew what we liked. We knew what kind of activities we liked. I love to fish. My wife loves to be on the beach. We love to take our dogs for walks on the beach. We want to be around theme parks. We want to have access to airports. We want to be, close to multiple metropolitan areas without, having to go too far. And so all these different factors are what led us ultimately to come back to Florida. But really, at the end of the day, there were a ton of factors. And whether you're going into private practice for yourself, or you're even looking for a job, these same exact types of principles apply. The only difference, obviously, is that if you're pursuing an associateship or some kind of a position with a hospital, the chains are a little bit different because ultimately you can kind of separate ways a lot easier than you can if you establish a practice. Once you've done that, you're definitely buying a pretty heavy weight that can be a little bit difficult to escape from if you're not happy. So ensuring you're where you want to be is absolutely critical.
And also where your spouse or partner wants to be, because I've seen that kind of break a deal before where, we're in a small town, Midwestern city or town, and the doctor's wife or husband is from Los Angeles. And they say, wait a minute, like, how far is it to get to like a Target? And where's the grocery store? How many miles is that? And it's not going to work. It doesn't matter how much money they offer you. It doesn't matter how happy you are as the physician there working as an associate or buying into the practice. If your partner or spouse is not happy and does not like your demographic region, doesn't like the lifestyle there, it's not going to work. Okay?
Exactly right. Yeah, my wife, I remember when we used to have discussions in the early days about where ultimately we wanted to be. And I had this adventurous side to me where I'd thought about, looking at options in Montana or Maine. And usually the conversation was always, yeah, but where's the mall? Where's the mall relative to this office that might be, in a beautiful area with great weather or an excellent opportunity practice-wise financially. But it's those lifestyle elements. What do you do when you're not at work or at night or on the weekends or when you're taking time off that make you grounded and human? And you're right. If your spouse or even your kids, if you have kids who are old enough to have some input and they're like, hey, mom and dad, we like to do X, Y, Z. Can we do that where you're trying to move us? That could be a big problem.
So it's a whole combination of factors that you will know when you pick the right place, and you will know probably quicker when you don't, because I've had doctors that are like, well, I've narrowed it down to North Carolina, Atlanta, or Washington State. Those are very, very different places, and lifestyle is different, climate is different, and pay scale is very different. And I'm saying to them, you realize that in like North Carolina, you're paying your medical assistants $16 an hour, where in Washington State, no one will look at you for less than 21 or 22 an hour. I mean, there are major differences. Okay, so happy wife, partner, happy life. It is absolutely true. So once you've decided at least on a state or a geographic place, okay, if you don't have one already, you'll need a license to practice in that state. And every state has different requirements, so do your homework. You may have to call, and I put call in capital letters because I know a lot of the doctors on this webinar are younger, and I understand, like I have a almost 20 and 22-year-old, and yet calling we don't call, we just like text and we Snapchat, and we don't call, but you need to call, like dial a phone number and talk to a person. State licensing board websites can be extremely vague, so you have to call and obtain clarification on the process and requirements for licensure in your desired state. And there's probably some woman that's answering the phone that's worked there for 45 years. Her name is probably Karen, and you're gonna have to talk to Karen. And I know that's very like big, but
What?
yes, Karen, that's probably her name. And you have to get the details, because Karen holds your fate in her hands of when the state licensing, like when that becomes available. Is it twice a year? Is it just rolling and you can do it whenever? Because there's some states that are much different than other. Varying processes for licensure include board exams, later application dates, personal essays, higher fees, immediate CME requirements, renewal fees after 3 months. So one of my doctors experienced this where, okay, he got a state license and he was excited, and 3 months later they had him pay renewal fees. And it was like, what? We just paid that. Well, no, that was for last quarter. This is the new quarter. And minimal requirements. So congratulations. You've completed a residency and now have a license to practice in the great state of, let's say, Florida. Okay. And Dr. Schweibish, were you really considering Maine?
I did, yes. My wife did not so much, but yeah, I mean, that was on the radar. It was one of those things that we'd kind of looked at, and you know, I'd met folks at different conferences over the course of years, going to the APMA National or other, the Midwest or New York, you know, any of these conferences, and it's not that we didn't consider them, some of them more strongly than others, but ultimately, it's just, it is. You got down to the brass tacks of what you want and where your heart lies, and that, you know, we found ourselves feeling that compelled to come back to Florida. But, you know, and I just want to touch on one point about the licensing thing, because I have colleagues who have gone through this process. And you said it, that the states are not created equally. You have some states where you can breeze through that process of getting a license in a matter of 2-3 months. And then you have some where it's a really arduous, drawn out process where you have only one opportunity in a given year to pass a particular exam, like a jurisprudence exam or some type of a weird X-ray certification exam as a physician, or some type of special interview that you have to undergo. And specifically coming to mind are like Texas, Oklahoma, North Carolina. These are states that are notoriously difficult to get licensed in, so much so that it actually impedes, it kind of acts like a barrier for a lot of people to practice. And they kind of do that on purpose. They want to put the—
And COVID played a part in all of that too, because whatever their regular, you know, scheduled for licensure was, it has changed, and some of them have not gone back to normal still.
Yeah, so that's where, like what you said, you've got to call, you've got to be aggressive. When you don't get that phone call answered, you've got to call again, you've got to submit emails, you've got to be aggressive. And unfortunately, even here in Florida, I had some troubles myself dealing with some paperwork and back and forth, and missed faxes, and, you know, this hospital never sent this, and why, and, you know, so it's a lot of rigmarole, and you've got to plan in advance. That's all there is to it.
So which means that you have to really, in advance means not 3 months before you graduate from residency.
No.
I mean, you have to start looking at this years before. And even if you have to spend extra money to get licensed in 2 or 3 states rather than just one, because you're kind of trying to figure it out, do it. Just do it.
Sure. Yeah, and actually, those of you who end up practicing on a border, that's very frequent, that you'll have to get licensed in both areas if you're servicing hospitals on both sides of the state borders. I know a lot of people who have multiple practice licenses just because of that very issue, and they have to maintain all of those licenses, and that's a whole different process too.
And in some places, Midwest, I have a friend who has to hold licenses in 3 states because of just geographically, it makes sense. So these are all things you need to think about before. I mean, as you're sitting and watching Netflix at night or whatever you're doing, and to try to escape, you know, your studies in school or your residency program, and like just time to yourself, you still need to be thinking about all of these things. So here's the next step, which I think other than helping patients, we should say helping patients, yes, getting them better and saving lives and limbs, absolutely. But you need to make some money because making money is essential to live. So now the search and real decision-making begins. So let's talk about the pros and cons of hospital versus private practice employment. So private practice, the pros are more control of operational decisions, not right away if you're an associate, but maybe down the line, if you partner or buy into a practice, you have control of services provided, office decor, staffing levels, hiring and firing, normal business hours. So maybe in the future. So I'm trying to teach all of my startups that, and even existing practices, since the pandemic happened, the banking hours of like 8 to 5, 9 to 5, those don't have to be your hours. Like someone made that rule a long time ago, but that's not necessarily convenient for the area that you live or the patients that you would like to draw. So maybe there's one day that you start at 7 a.m. and you end at 3. And then there's another day that you find maybe Thursdays where a lot of patients want to come in for in-office procedures because it's easier for them to take off a Friday, have the weekend to recover, they go back to work on Monday. So maybe you want to see patients from, 10 to 7 on Thursdays, but no one can dictate this to you. You can do whatever you want. And when doctors say to me, what do you think about if I switched my clinic hours to this? And I'll say, it is your practice, right? Like you are the boss and you get to make the decision. So do it. And if it doesn't work, then change it, right? No harm, no foul. And then the pros also are patient relationships and community. The cons, legislative changes cause larger impacts, insurance carrier and payer contract headaches, overhead costs, staffing issues, and there have never been more staffing issues than there have been in the past 2 years. But not to say that hospitals don't have that problem now too. Everyone has that problem. Everyone's short-staffed. You see the signs everywhere, like, be nice to the people that showed up today. And that's true everywhere. So Dr. Schweibish, any comments on private practice, pros and cons?
Yeah, so a lot, and this is very common. Most of my colleagues, coming out of residency or fellowship, they're kind of bombarded with these opportunities. Whether you're reading PM News, you're reading the APMA career listings, you're talking to people that you're going to conferences, you're being bombarded with a lot of these private practice opportunities. And these are your doctors who either are solo and they're trying to plan ahead, they're bringing on an associate, or you've got a small group of 2 to 10 doctors and they're looking to bring someone on to open up a new office or to augment another office. So these are really the largest number of opportunities that you'll probably encounter coming out of residency or fellowship, and they're not created equally. What Cindy was talking about is spot on in that there are some offices where you'll come in as a new associate and you'll actually be responsible for hiring your own MA. They'll basically put you into the hot seat as the hiring manager because they want you to gel really well with that new MA that they bring into the office for you. But you'll have other offices where it's basically their way or the highway. And the key thing with all of this is that when you do the interview process, when you visit these offices, you have to really get a feel for the vibe. You've got to know whether that family, because it is a family that you're joining, makes sense for you. If it's very structured, very rigid, very protocol driven, and that's not your thing, you like things being a little bit more relaxed and a little bit more, day by day, we kind of figure things out as we go along. That's something that you have to be not only maybe kind of transparent about when you're going through the process, but you've got to be honest with yourself and know where you think you're going to fit best. With regard to the cons that Cindy had talked through, these could not be more applicable. And this is whether you're employed as a physician or you're in private practice for yourself. The legislative changes and the insurance issues, they hit us hard. My wife and I are the only 2 doctors in our practice. And, when we came into Florida, Blue Cross was basically telling us, at the time. And we took over an existing practice of a doctor who had been fully credentialed with Blue Cross. And Blue Cross had said, well, hey, listen, you're the new kids on the block. We've got like a 9-year waiting list to join the Blue Cross panel. So not much we can do for you. We'll add you to the waiting list. So after a lot of back and forth, we said, well, listen, we're taking over a practice from a doctor who saw plenty of Blue Cross patients. And for continuity of care, we need to be on that panel. So finally, going all the way up to the VPs of whoever in some Atlanta office, they said, oh yeah, okay, I guess we can make the case to put you on the panel, but we're only going to pay you 60 or 65% of Medicare to do it. So these are the types of things that in private practice, only you will ever experience, because when you work for a large hospital network or a large multi-specialty group, really obviously, you know, the VA system or university systems, you don't even feel any of this. You have no idea, because these institutions have massive bargaining power and they've got all this figured out by people who are way beyond just the physician pay grade. So you have to be ready to tackle this, whether you're employed or not, because it does affect your bottom line.
And you have to consider that when you want to go out and start your own practice, is that a lot of areas, a lot of states now, it's exactly that. The private panels are closed. I have found ways around that through other organizations and linking your individual MPI to their big group.
Sure.
But yeah, it's tough to go through that, but it's also a mindset of, if you want to accept the pros with the cons, knowing that you are the master of your own destiny.
Correct.
Figuring out what you want to do, but it's not easy. And I do talk to quite a few doctors who, just after a 30-minute phone call, I can sense that they are either maturity-wise not ready, or they just need to go work for a couple of years and figure out, you know, what they like, what they don't like, where they want to practice, what type of practice they want, because that's super important when you're opening your own. Something you said about kind of doing your research when you go into become an associate and figure out the vibe of the practice. You need to figure out more than the vibe. You need to figure out how many associates they've had that have come and gone over the last, say, 5 years. And, you know, I'm a big fan of crime, real crime podcasts and things, but you can find anyone online and you can reach out to anyone, and you should try to contact the doctors the associates that lasted a year, not even a year, and figure out why. And sometimes it's a total personality conflict, and sometimes it's because their spouse wasn't happy or the spouse got a job somewhere else. And that's totally acceptable, and that happens. But if they've gone through several associates in the past few years and you speak to them kind of off the record and they tell you the same reason that they left, that they weren't treated well, that they were made big promises that weren't kept, that it's the same thing. Please be very careful, because when you get out and you want to find a job because you need an income, you tend to jump at things that look like the grass is always greener. And I can tell you that it's not. So make sure that you do your due diligence, because it's not just about you being the right fit for them. It's about them being the right fit for you, unless you're looking at it as a stepping stone. And most existing practices are not looking at hiring associates that want to stay for a year and leave, because it takes them 8 months to get your NPI linked to their group contracts, and you're not making any money in that time. So just be very careful. And like my favorite podcast, Crime Junkies, they always say, what do they say? Be rude, be weird, stay alive. But I'm saying it in terms of alive, you have a job in a practice. Just ask questions, and don't be afraid to ask questions that you feel are kind of awkward, because those things are going to come out anyway. Okay, so enough about my crime junkie fascination. Hanging your own shingle. So if you decide I want to be my own boss, and I get these emails every single day And it's so funny that these doctors will reach out to me, or they'll have their spouses reach out to me, and they'll say like it's a really urgent email. Like, we really want to talk to you. We're really so excited and we want to wear options. And I get right back to them. And then it's like a week goes by and no one responds to me. And I think this is the first sign of, if you don't respond to emails right away when you reached out because it was important, things aren't going to go so well. So you can be your own boss, but you need patience and patience, right? Time, planning, support, financial, and at times emotional. I've given so much emotional advice, baby advice, therapy advice throughout this whole process. I can't even tell you. Realistic expectations and goal setting. Okay, what you will need: professional services. Okay, so this is including, and it will require you to secure these. Legal counsel. Yes, if you have an attorney in the family, okay, but maybe they're not really in the medical legal field, or they're, real estate attorneys, that you need someone specific. Accountant, architect, interior designer, general contractor, billing, revenue cycle management company, credentialing firm, compliance services, not include, but not limited to OSHA, HIPAA, cybersecurity, HR, the list goes on and on.
I
So
think
here's a
I
list.
think I actually just paid invoices to almost every single one of those types of
Right.
people.
And you will, and you will, and you should, if you're doing it right, because there's so many things that if you're too cheap to pay for them, you will pay for them one way or the other. It will come back to bite you in terms of, you weren't compliant, you didn't know the rules, you're not an expert in XYZ, and you'll pay for it.
You bet.
So just be careful with, I know someone, or I think I can figure that out. Some things, yes, you can, but others, you are not an attorney because you watch, a lot of attorney like shows, you're not an accountant, you're not. So all of these things, this is a 12-month graphical timeline for starting your own practice. And even with this timeline, there are lots of delays, because there are lots of factors in this process that you yourself as a physician have zero control over. And that's really, really difficult for a lot of doctors to handle. So just finding secure practice consultant, somebody like me, that will say to you, okay, you're looking to open July 1st, next year, or whatever it is. This is what needs to be done. This is about how much time you need. And then an attorney, an accountant, an architect, billing company, credentialing company. But the most important thing is that you have a location, because without a location and an address, you can't establish your entity. Well, you can, I shouldn't say that, you can. However, if you're going to establish, say, an LLC and have a tax ID secured, and you don't have a location, physical office location, you cannot use a PO box, you can't use your home address. Please don't use your parents' address. You can use a virtual address to establish the entity. However, when you start the credentialing process, with credentialing is one thing. Credentialing lets you know if these panels are even open to new contracts. Okay, so that's totally different. So you pay this money, you put all this paperwork together, and you send that out, and you need an office location address, whatever your address is, 123 Main Street, Suite 102. That has to be on all of these applications. And then they tell you yes or no. And you experienced it, Dr. Schweibish, and all of my startups for the past 5 years have started, they go through the same thing of, oh no, Cigna supposedly is going to be like 30% of our patient volume, and they're closed. What do we do? So what did you do?
Yeah. So, I mean, you just have to navigate those things one at a time. I mean, just like we did with Blue Cross, it required a lot of, talking to higher ups and back and forth emails and phone calls and begging and groveling and pleading a little bit. And making a case for why we needed it. But the scary thing to me is I'm looking through this chart, and whether you realize it or not, you go through all of this. I think so much of it overlaps and interconnects, and there's like little caveats to everything, and there's little sublines that should go under so many of these things, but it is spot on. I mean, every single thing on here, my wife and I went through as we were going through the process, and this was acquiring a practice. If you're starting a practice from scratch, it's no different. And if anything, actually, the barriers are even a little bit higher, simply because you have zero template other than maybe what some people have told you, or if you have the guidance of someone who's an expert in practice development and practice management. But even for us taking over an existing practice, we had a doctor who'd been there for 30 plus years, was very antiquated. He did things a certain way, which we did not do things that way. So we had to reinvent the wheel in many ways, but at least we had a template to work off of and kind of go through all these motions together. So it's a great timeline. I encourage screenshots of this, because you will go through it if you have any desire at all of going through this process.
So we'll make this available, this presentation,
go.
afterwards in a PDF format anyway, so people don't have to do that. But just to kind of piggyback on what you just said. So I've worked with a lot of doctors who are weighing the options of, should I just start from scratch, from nothing, from zero patients, or should I buy an existing practice from a doctor that has not kept up with any of the changes over the last 25 years? Everything's so antiquated. I walk in there, it looks like the Brady Bunch's house. Like, what are you going to do? So here's your two options when you purchase an existing practice, is that you do an asset sale or a stock sale. So a stock sale means that you are purchasing their tax ID number, their group NPI, all their insurance contracts. Good, better, and different. Okay, we're assuming that if it's an older practice and they've had contracts with Blue Cross and Cigna and Aetna and all those for years, that they're probably going to be a higher fee schedule than someone starting from scratch, because it's not getting better as time goes on. But that also means you are on the hook for all of the takebacks, the clawbacks, the overpayments, the audits, the medical reviews, everything that happened before you got there. And a lot of these older doctors have their heads buried right in the sand, and any LCDs and compliance changes and everything, they have not paid attention, and they feel like, oh, it's fine. I didn't know about it. I can't get in trouble for it. But now you can, because that's yours and you took it over. Okay. But there is also the security of having a volume. You have patients to see. So you could change your billing methods. You could change the compliance. You can paint the walls. You can get rid of the shag carpeting. You can do whatever you want to do, and it's yours, but it's still a process. Okay. If you buy an existing practice and you just do an asset sale, which means basically you're buying patients and whatever junk is in their office. Basically, their antiquated X-ray machine, that it's an actual film that you have to develop, and their treatment chairs from 1972 and everything else, right? But then you have your own entity that you've started, your new group that you have to try to get credentialed and contracted, and that's taking forever, or they're just saying the panel's closed. So it's just as much work either way. Correct. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah, and we just, for the sake of discussion, we did an asset sale, and there's tax reasons for doing one or the other also, which play into that. But ultimately we bit the bullet and did the asset sale so that we could we knew we had to navigate a lot of issues by doing that, but ultimately the benefit is there's definite tax implications of doing it that way, and also the liability was the big thing that was off our plate. So
because you never really know.
Good. No, you don't
know how they've been billing and how they've been documenting, or lack thereof. Yes. Until you start digging, and what you find you may not like. So finding locations first on the list: introduction to a commercial real estate agent based on location analysis, city, state, county, demographic analysis, spatial needs and considerations, plans for future expansion. Like if you are one doctor, but you say, you know what, I want to build my own little empire where I have 3 doctors working out of this location and keep buying, that's fine. But you can always start in a smaller space, and it's a good problem to have if you outgrow it faster than, say, your lease is up, or you outgrow it faster than you planned and you own the space. You could always lease that out and go and buy another space. Touring of commercial properties with representative real estate agent, assistance with negotiating of commercial property and space rent, lease or purchase through real estate agent, execution of lease or securing of mortgage, commencement of office build out versus leasehold improvements, and coordination of move-in. So I'm not knocking real estate agents. I'm not. But I will tell you that if you connect with a commercial real estate agent and you tell them, I am a new podiatrist and I want to find a space to practice in this geographic area, and you draw a 5-10 mile circle radius that you want to be in. And this is what I want between, let's say, between 1,300 and 1,900 square feet of space, or 1,500 and 2,000 square foot of space. And it has to have at least room for 4 treatment rooms and this and that. And they start taking you to places that are 3,000 square feet or 900 square feet, and in a place that's not even remotely near where you want to be, or it's like down the stairs and around the corner and there's no signage, and give them like 3 strikes, you're out. They take you to 3 property locations and they are not remotely close to what you asked for. Dump them. Don't sign anything with any of these real estate agents. Okay. If they're just helping you find a space, don't sign a thing. They don't work for you. You don't owe them anything. And don't feel bad about it, but say, I just don't think you're quite grasping what I need, so I'm going to move on. And don't apologize for it, okay? Most of my doctors that have looked for their space, they don't end up with their first real estate agent. And if it's a family member or friend, you're going to have to be rude to them and you're going to have to dump them. So just be careful with that, and don't let them waste your time, because when it comes down to it, they're just looking at their commission. You cannot begin credentialing without a physical address, like I said before. Not your home, not your parents' home, please, not your parents' home, and not a PO box, okay? So once credentialing and contracts are underway, your EDI, that's electronic data interchange enrollment, can begin. So your EHR, whoever you choose, will do this for you. Then your ERA, the electronic remittance advice, which is an electronic data interchange version of a medical insurance payment, explanation of benefits. Some revenue cycle management or billing companies will do this for you. Then after that, your electronic funds transfer can be set up. This is on you to do with each payer individually. It seems like all this stuff should happen together. Like you go through credentialing, you go through contracting, and then, yeah, they should just set up the interchange so that you can submit and receive electronic, right? Submission of claims and receivement of payments, and then it goes right into your bank account. But these are all separate steps. And some insurance companies, you can't even set it up until you have a claim to submit. In others, you just see it set up in your program where it's like all set, and then it comes back. But I can't figure out the rhyme or reason why they don't all do it the same. I mean, Dr. Schweibish, you must have gone through this when you first opened and you were like, what is going on? Why are we getting paper checks and other things are coming electronically? And what do we do?
I hate to admit this, but here we are now. So we took over the practice from the previous doc. It was May of 2019. Here we are coming up on May 2022, and we're still actually dealing with some of that. We have some very oddball payers, from snowbirds that come from Connecticut, New York, or whatever, through a union, plan that they have or whatever. And like you said, unless you submit a claim, they have no idea who you are. You get this paper check 6 months down the line, but yeah, I mean, it still happens. Obviously we've worked with the biggest ones and the bulk of our payers, but they took months. I mean, we're working through a lot of these on their websites and calling, and we even had someone kind of helping us through all of that, and it still was quite a process. But once it's done, it's done. So
it just all seems very antiquated.
Yeah.
And there's nothing you can do about that. Okay, so financially, Drafting of a 3 to 5 year financial projection to aid in the securing of financial backing, creating budgets, introduction to investment planning, and wealth asset management for practice growth. So there's lots of financial things that unless, you were a small business owner in a previous life, or your family was a small business owner or a large business owner, it's hard to wrap your head around this stuff. Okay. So you're going to need a strong business plan. And fortunately, I've done this enough where it doesn't take me nearly as long as it would take you to write this business plan. And I just customize it towards the doctor, the type of practice they want, their goals for how many patients a day they want to see, what type of practice they want to have, how surgical is it, how not, and the demographic area. So this is just some, points to consider when you're developing a business plan. Do your homework, overestimate the costs, and underestimate, be conservative with income when you do your projections. Okay, that kind of like you want to make it so that you far exceed any of the projections effortlessly, because you really you're going to deliver much more than you promise. So here's a table of contents. This is the very first startup I ever helped, David Applegate in Katy, Texas. He now has 5 years later, 2 locations and 3 doctors in the practice. And we just kind of figured this out together, how to write these plans, how to prepare for what we could. And, we ran into problems, and it just helped us prepare for the future.
And I gotta make a quick comment though, Cindy, about this business plan. So in a previous life, before I ever got into medicine, I went to business school and I pursued an MBA, finished my MBA right around the time the recession hit back in the day, 12, 14 years ago now. And I've been through plenty of business plans, and I've read through this one, and it was really well done. I mean, and this is exactly the type of thing that when you're applying for bank financing or private financing, they're going to want to see. And when it's as well crafted as this is, these are the types of ones that get people to open their eyes and say, hey, actually, this is someone who we could potentially take a risk on and not feel like we're just shooting blanks in the dark here. So,
and some of the business plans that I've written over the past, 5 or 6 years, I repeat a lot of the information, but I'm going with the fact that most people just have a small attention span, and they're so impressed by like, wow, this is like 15 pages long. Our original business plan was 52 pages. And it was a little bit much. And so I've condensed it down over the years, but still, yeah, these people that are working for the SBA or just even local banks, they're not used to seeing something like this with graphics and data that you researched yourself, and projections and color and maps and all these different things. It's impressive to look at, and it does make you stand out from someone that's trying to open a sub shop that has no research done. Right. So we have a chat question. For credentialing and hospital privileging, do you need to have your graduation diploma to apply? I just received my state license last week. I've completed most of CAQH. Applying for DEA license next week. I have my own office space. Can I start applying now to some insurances before I end residency? Most want to know that you actually graduated, but a lot of it comes down to the hospital privileging. And before they will allow you to actually start the credentialing process, you have to have hospital privileges first. I mean, first the license in that state, but also that you graduated and that you went through that process. So Dr. Schweibish, anything to add to that?
Yeah, so that's exactly right. So the thing, and it's also a little bit dependent on the specific facility and state and what you're applying for. But what the whole point of it would be that I encourage you to, if you know obviously where your office is located, you're in an immensely different situation because you know which hospital system you're applying for. So you need to be reaching out to that hospital where you want to be on staff, or multiple hospitals for that matter, and get the ball rolling, because even getting the paperwork rolling can take weeks alone. And by the time here we are, what we are, mid-March, you're only a couple months away from graduation. By the time you actually, get the whole process rolling, get your paperwork into them, get your school diplomas and transcripts and whatever other crap that they might require from you sent over, and you have a committee date or whatever it is that they require, they may line it up to where they can wait, or they can do things pending receipt of your diploma. So just get the ball rolling, and they'll tell you very quickly at what point you have to stop or wait because you don't have XYZ. So don't wait to get it. Just kind of get the ball rolling and see what they have to say.
Yeah. And you also can find in some areas with hospitals, as long as you have another podiatrist in the area that will vouch for you and then cover for you to take call.
Yeah, and that's actually a very big thing that my wife and I ran into when we moved to the area. So we had the doctor whose practice we took over. He was basically our sponsoring physician, or the physician who would, cover us should we need something, until we obviously were able to get up and running. But if we didn't have that, if you were moving to an area where you don't know anyone, you don't know any doctors, you're starting from scratch, can be a bit of a hurdle. I actually helped a young physician in my county recently who joined a large group. She was trying to get her hospital privileges at the same hospital where we're on staff, and she didn't know anybody. And only because of my role within the FPMA, I had reached out to her, introduced myself, tried to get her to come to one of our component meetings. And that's where she kind of opened up to me and said, hey, listen, I'm trying to get on staff in the hospital. I don't know anybody to kind of sign a letter of reference and help me out. I offered to help her out, and sure enough, that's what she needed. So made it happen.
Yeah. And I've been able to do that too with, all of my connections. If a doctor's opening in a new area, I'll say like, oh, okay, I can connect you with a couple of people. They might be like 15 or 20 miles from you, but who knows, like maybe they'll still let them vouch for you. We want to look at market analysis, podiatry outlook and trends, just kind of like how many, doctors are in the area, how many podiatrists in the area, and how many are going to retire in the next few years, and what the population is like, and diabetes and all of that stuff, and why it's important that you open there. The area highlights, like this says, this was Katy, Texas. This was quite a few years ago, so it's even more. 300,000 people live in the Katy area, many drawn by Katy ISD, the preeminent school district in the Houston area, which currently provides education of 73,000 students. You just want to give some general population statistics, maybe the average age, the average household income, and what you're expecting to see as your patient population. So Dr. Applegate, when I spoke to him, he called me when he was probably halfway through his first year of residency, because I had met him when he was a student. And if there's anyone that's like way ahead of himself, it was Dr. Applegate. And that first phone call, when he was in his first year of residency, he was already talking to me about, okay, and then I'll open my second location and I'll hire my third associate. And I thought, can we just graduate from residency and pick a spot that we want to practice first? He was so far ahead that he knew what kind of practice he wanted. He said, Cindy, I want to look in my waiting room and I want to see soccer moms. I want to see a bunch of middle-aged women in yoga pants with lots of kids with flat feet and grown toenails in towing. And he got it. He built it. The whole field of dreams. If you build it, they will come. That's what he did. He knew what he wanted. He knew what he wanted to see. He knew the type of population he wanted to draw, and he did it. Analysis of competitors. So this is really important in places like Texas, Florida, Ohio, California, anywhere that there's a ton of podiatrists. And because I have this question all the time about competition, you can succeed anywhere. if you have the right formula, if you do the right thing, if you provide the best care, if you're in it for the right reasons, because there could be a ton of competition in your area, but maybe they have questionable ethics. Maybe they're going to retire soon. Maybe if you look it up and there's 10 within 10 miles, like 8 of them don't even have a website. So Dr. Schweibish, can you kind of comment on competition?
Yeah, I mean, it was a factor for us, definitely. I mean, we looked at all those types of things. You know, we knew that the general age of the doctors who were in the area where we were, you know, taking over this practice. We knew that there was population growth that was occurring. We knew that it was a good, good local economic situation. We knew that there was opportunity to potentially, outshine some of the competition with regard to marketing or what kind of services we could bring to the table in terms of just even whether it be surgically or non-surgically. There are a lot of things you can do to separate yourself in a community. So you don't have to be the, master surgeon who can do, X-fix with flaps and everything else to be able to stand out in a community. You really don't. So, we looked at all these things, but there was a very wise physician who still practices down in South Florida that I have great respect for, who once told me, she said, if I had listened to everybody who told me back when I first started in practice that you should not open up in a place like Miami because there's so much competition, she's like, I never would have gotten to where I did today, because at the time when she was starting out, a female podiatrist working in South Florida was almost kind of unheard of. And she overcame a lot of obstacles to get her practice open and grew it into a very, very successful practice that still operates today. And she did so because she really didn't listen to that common guidance that if there's saturation or competition, you cannot succeed. Exactly what Cindy said is true. You've just got to have some competitive advantage. If you don't, and you're introverted and you're shy and you don't really have gusto for marketing and you don't particularly care how your practice is run, then you should probably
hire someone who does.
Yes,
right.
Hire someone who does, or you should probably end up in the middle of Wyoming, because I don't know how else they're going to make it.
Right, right. And there was something that I said, so I had my own pop-up meeting a couple weekends ago in Columbus, and I put out there an ask to all my attendees. And I said, I just want you from now on moving forward, stop comparing yourself to your colleagues, to your peers. I want you to only compare you to you. And I only want you to compare yourself to you year after year, quarter after quarter, to see how much better you can do than you did the last year. And stop letting social media posts of what your colleagues are putting on there, of how successful they are, how beautiful and perfect their kids are, and everything else. It's all fake. It's all a facade. So don't let that dishearten you. If you want to open a practice, you can succeed anywhere, but you need to go out and you need to yell it from the rooftops that you are there to help, and you will see any patient. And at the beginning, it's not about making money. It's about establishing relationships. And that is it. I've been in this field for a long time as a consultant. And I can tell you that my first few clients, I think I forgot to charge them. I really do, because I was too busy, and I would do it nights, weekends, whenever. I had a standing call with a podiatrist at 10 o'clock every Sunday night. And I would hold the phone and she would just yell and like let off steam and tell me like what everything was going wrong in her practice. And there was some crying, and I didn't say much. I just listened. And then she said, okay, thanks. I'll talk to you next week. And that was it. That's all she needed. So it is just relationships at the beginning. Don't worry about the money. You treat your patients right. You do the right thing, and the money will come. So let's just go back to the money will come eventually, but now you need to pay your bills and you need to eat. And in some cases, you need to support your family. So a hybrid practice model when you're starting out on your own is probably the best thing. And I know it's not fun. It's not sexy, or it's not glamorous. It's not any of those things, but it is necessary and it pays the bills. So Dr. Schweibish, you want to talk about this kind of, not so glamorous model that works?
Correct. Yeah. And I mean, and this is exactly what, for the most part, what my wife and I had done early on. I mean, so when we took over the practice, we had obviously patient flow. We had patients that were established with the practice who would come in. They heard that a new doctor, two new doctors had come in and taken over. Some were, skeptical, but by and large, we actually did very well in retaining the patient base. But going from a, one doctor, semi kind of retired part-time practice to a two doctor, full-time, young, energetic, ready to go kind of practice, we had room. We had space to fill, and we needed to obviously supplement our income. So we got on board with a large group that kind of supports different nursing homes and assisted living facilities across the state of Florida, and worked, and we supplemented our income by doing some care in these facilities, either on weekends or evenings or wherever it might be, simply because sitting around twiddling your thumbs didn't count. We didn't provide any revenue. We did all the community events we possibly could do for our practice. We met other doctors in our area. We filled our schedule in locally as much as possible, but there needed to be time to generate revenue elsewhere. And that's where this hybrid practice model comes into play. There's a lot of different ways you can do it. I mean, in a given area, there are other doctors who have relationships, and depending on how friendly they are to a new doctor in town, they might be willing to possibly help you augment or take a load off of their schedule by seeing some of their patients. There are plenty of assisted living facilities, nursing homes who need care in a community. And unfortunately, younger doctors now coming out, they look at that as not being very glamorous or very sexy, of course, but definitely when you've got student loans that come due, you've got a practice that you're trying to build up, you have to find these ways of doing it, unless you've got very wealthy parents or very deep pockets yourself. So
Even if you do, there's something to be said about rolling up your sleeves and getting to work.
correct.
And,
Yeah.
and feeling accomplished for what you've done and the money that you've brought in.
And I will tell you that actually from a lot of those contracts and a lot of those early relationships back in those days, we still have sustained relationships to where now, even though we're not doing a care in assisted living facilities or anything to that nature, those directors, those sites that have nurses and people, they remember us and they come and see us in spades as patients, because they remember how willing we were to provide care for their people and how we were on site. And now they trust us with their own care, or having patients, at those facilities be transported to come see us when they have more, pressing needs other than just, routine foot care.
And again, it's relationships and it's educating them as far as what you can do to help them. So this is clinic volume assumptions and what was going to happen fiscal years 1 through 5. We kind of projected out so that the goal was to see 32 patients a day, and how that was going to happen kind of just gradually over the first few years to sustain it. And then obviously taking the home visits out of that at a certain point.
Yeah, and that type of projection, and just like actually what you have here, these financial highlights and all these different numeric projections, we actually just went through this about a year and a half ago, going through an SBA loan process. So my wife and I had kind of aggressive plans on how we were going to renovate our office, which we purchased, and also expand and open a second office location. And we did all that with a small business association loan. And it was very much like this. I mean, we had to develop projections. They needed to see trends. They needed to have an understanding of where we were headed into the future. And fortunately, I was able to put all that together. But if you didn't have really a good accountant to help you, or people with a really good understanding of financial projections, it can be a little complicated to put together. But it's all doable. None of it's impossible.
And it's important to not get offended by this, but there will be a loss.
Oh, yeah.
In at least year 1, if not halfway through year 2. I mean, that's just how it is. You're going to open a practice. Don't plan on paying yourself for a while. Okay. That's just not part of it. So again, you won't see a paycheck for a while. So go out there and bring in some patients. There's a difference between marketing and advertising. We can do a whole nother webinar at some point about marketing for new practices. But even if you're joining an existing practice as an associate, get your butt out there. Don't just sit there and expect them to feed you patients. Show your value to the practice. Get out there and shake hands and meet people and tell them what skill set you bring to the existing practice, And it could be something maybe more complicated surgery or more pediatrics or whatever it is that you do or you enjoy treating. You need to get out there because you can't just sit and expect to be fed, because that is not going to impress your employers. And it's certainly not going to fast track you towards partnership.
Yeah, definitely. And, and for those of you who are ultimately going to join a group or, work in an employed setting, if you're on a productivity based, income schedule where a percentage of the revenue that you generate for the practice is what a large portion of your income is going to be, volume is your friend. And so if you don't have patients filling up your schedule and you don't have recurring days of full clinic schedules that expand into the future, you're going to pay the price for that ultimately, because it's going to come out of your pocket.
Right. So these are just a couple things. Like I told Dr. Schweibish that I made up this little card for an office that they already hired this doctor and he's great, he's wonderful. And then they called me afterwards and they're like, oh, we totally forgot to get him cards and we totally forgot to get anything to promote that he's joined our practice. So it was like, a little late, but we got these out there to make sure that referring providers in the community knew that he had joined the practice, the newest addition to our team. That's important. Should have happened before he started. And then here's the Coast and Soul kind of like trifold brochure, which is awesome. So Dr. Schweibish, talk about like how you determine what you highlight in this kind of, marketing material.
Sure. So, so the biggest thing for us, and you refer to this in the marketing world as collateral. I mean, these are the things basically that highlight your brand. They highlight what you're able to bring to the community. And so we have these trifolds, which the other half of it is obviously missing, but these sit in our waiting room and they showcase to the community and every patient that comes in the door some of the ancillary services that we provide. And if you're in private practice, at the end of the day, to stay alive, you have to find alternative sources of generating revenue. It cannot be just level 3 office visits all day long and doing routine foot care. Those days are long gone. That was the 80s and 90s. So to stay viable and to generate a good income, you have to incorporate things like, shockwave therapy, ultrasound. You have to be savvy. You have to have, sports medicine, ways to augment things. Can you do PRP, amniotic stem cell derived injections? You name it. Whether you're a wound care expert and you can do skin grafting, or you can do split thickness in your office, or whatever it might be, all of these types of modalities are the things that you have to put in writing. You have to put them in front of your patients, whether they're in written format, on a rotating basis, on some type of advertising mechanism in your office, in printed ads, whatever it is. So this is just one example of many that we have in our office that shows this to patients. And we're lucky that we have a marketing team. We have marketing consultants that we work with that help to develop a lot of this. But a lot of this is actually the product more of my wife's work. She's got a very good eye for artistic detail and graphic design. And so a lot of the way that we developed our color scheme and then the way that we chose to present our image to the community was a product of her thought process. And that's part of why I think in private practice we do well, because we care about those details and we actually want to put the time in to do it. If that kind of stuff does not excite you and you don't care about your brand or your image or how you present yourself to a community, you're probably better off as an employed physician.
Right, exactly. So with that, as part of your business plan, you have to have a good marketing plan, because if they're going to give you money, any kind of, lender, they want to know what you're going to do to promote yourself, how you're going to make yourself stand out. And all of my practices, they put me and my whole bio and my background in their business plan, because it's like, look at who this is. She was inducted into the Practice Management Hall of Fame, and she did this, and she's worked with this many people, and they're all successful, and look at all their websites, and they're all still in business. And it's sometimes not what you know, it's who you know. And it's perception versus reality of, if you look like you know what you're doing, it's kind of like you fake it till you make it, and you have the right people surrounding you that are going to help you get to that point. So again, your build your practice, build your brand, but not in your name. Years ago, every podiatrist was like Joe Smith, DPM. That's it. That's a name. And if they ever took on an associate or a partner, it was still Joe Smith, DPM. Hi, I'm calling to see Dr. Smith. Well, do you want to see Dr. Smith or Dr. Johnson? Who's Dr. Johnson? It's just Dr. Smith. Oh, well, as it turns out, we took on another doctor, but it's about branding now.
It is. Yeah. And my wife, I mean, she, bless her to death. She every night I used to come home just in agony over hearing the previous doctor's name as the name of the practice as we were going through the transition, because that is all you saw on every invoice, every piece of mail, and you couldn't escape it. So those days, please just do not name the practice after yourself. That is just so antiquated.
Right. And even this whole thing, like even if it was just you, okay, and you had the plan of expanding over time, taking on more than one doctor, more than one location maybe, but you just had coast and sole, foot and ankle specialist, just singular. I have a problem with that because I'll say to people like, can we just put an S? How about an S? Or if it's center, can we just put an S just in case? Or we're going to have to put coast and sole, foot and ankle specialist of this town or center of this town after it. Fine. Just make sure that if you choose a name, because this has happened to me before with one of my practices, the name happened to be trademarked or copyrighted or something. And it was a very common name and it wasn't even exactly the same, the whole practice name, and it wasn't even remotely close in the country, but they came after my doctors and they said, change your name or we're suing you. It's like, what? We're not even remote. We're not even within 3 states away. You're 10 states away and it didn't matter. So just when you pick a name, be very careful about it. Okay, so let's explore aspects of establishing a practice that you may not have considered or ever heard of. So organizational entity formation, business registration, business plan, development, implementation. We talked about that, protection of assets, finding and securing malpractice insurance broker, business related health and disability insurance, all of these things. Like now when you get an SBA loan, Dr. Schweibish, did you and your wife need to get life insurance?
Sure did. Yeah,
Yep.
Couldn't do it without it. I mean, actually, that was one of the very first things that our bank and our lender had talked about. And they said, listen, before we can do anything, you've got to start that process. And it's a long process between getting your medical examinations and this and all these records put together. It's a process. So they tell you right off the bat, you better get that policy underwritten because we can't do much without it. And so that did. It held us up.
Yeah. And so that's why I have a broker, an insurance broker that can do malpractice, disability, life insurance, like all kind of in one to get you started. What you do in the future is up to you, but right. I mean, you need life insurance because
and disability. And disability actually for us too. Yeah.
Disability is the one type of insurance that I wish every physician would get. The sooner the better, because I've seen so many instances where older doctors from normal wear and tear, treating patients in nursing homes, treating sitting down, hunched over, the back, the neck, the spine issues. I've seen doctors, that have MS, doctors that have, just a freak accident and they go blind in one eye and they can't practice and they didn't have the disability insurance that they needed. So that's something when you're young and you're healthy, get it, because they're not going to want to insure you later on. Credentialing, privileging. So we talked about obtaining a state license in county where necessary, obtaining federal and state narcotic licenses, credentialing for insurers, including durable medical equipment. Durable medical equipment with Medicare is totally separate. And you do not apply for that till you're in your space, because no matter what you put as your open date, they will come out unannounced. And if you're not there and your sign's not posted, your hours aren't posted, they'll say, we'll take your $500 and we'll see you next year, maybe. Applications for hospital and surgical center privileges, discussions of options with affiliation with hospital IPAs for improved fee schedules. That's something we could talk about later on. Applications for skilled nursing facilities and outpatient facilities, if that's what you want to do as part of that hybrid model. So personnel, we can just fly through this. I know we could talk about this for like 5 hours, I know, but part-time versus full-time, you're going to need help with ad placement, interviewing tips and techniques, personality testing and metrics, hiring of staff, employee handbook development, training staff through online lessons and exams, video meetings and training sessions, probationary period recommendations and assessment tools for performance reviews, recommendations for hiring and training physician or practice liaison. There's lots of staff related issues you've never even thought about before. Then go ahead.
Just really quick, and it's actually a perfect anecdote for this type of discussion, because actually just this morning, my wife and I had a 3.5 hour long meeting with all of our staff, and all we did was discuss customer service on the phone. That's all we did. We used a lot of Cindy's resources and some other resources we had pulled together, and we spent 3 hours talking about everything to do with how to take phone calls, how to deal with problem patients on the phone, how to navigate through billing issues on the phone. You name it. And if that kind of thing does not particularly intrigue you, I mean, you can have the best practice manager in the world, but you're the owner, you're the doctor who's in charge of that practice. And ultimately, if your staff is not answering a phone the way that you want them to do, you've got to be the one to make the changes possible. And you do that through training. So we spend a lot of time working with our staff in meetings and trying to work through a lot of these issues instead of seeing patients sometimes. Got to do it.
Right. Then the other thing is choosing your electronic health record and practice management system, which is, I highly recommend that you have an integrated system. So it sees each other. So your scheduling and documenting sees the billing side, the claim submission side, the rejection side. It's all tied together. So you know what's what when patients check in. Equipment and supplies, assistance with initial ordering and purchasing of office furniture, electronics and ancillary equipment, office and clinical supplies, and budgeting for that. I mean, when you go through your residency, would you have any idea how to build a list of like what you need in the office to treat patients? No?
I mean, yeah, I mean, the list is, it's arduous. I mean, I think actually one of your other slides coming up here has a really good supply list yeah, I mean, here, it's Excel document after Excel document, from the tiniest little cotton tip applicator to every kind of blade.
Things that you never thought about, because when you're shadowing in other people's offices, you just open the drawer and there's all the stuff and it's in there and you just use it. But when you have to sit down and figure out like, what kind of just tools do I like? What kinds of instruments do I use? Like, what was that name of that, Miltex, or was that just I have no idea. You have no idea. So these kind of things are priceless, all these little lists. And then like for IT and computers, this is totally personal. I am an Apple and Mac person. I would never go any other way, but some are diehard. Like, I want a Chromebook. I need this. I need my HP, whatever. Fine. But you still have to get it, order it, pay for it. So then we talk about the ideal practice space. The good thing is that I've worked with enough startups that have a lot of blueprints. So then when I see blueprints that make absolutely no sense, then I can go in and help them reconfigure. Like I just saw one recently because the doctor was in a big rush, a really big rush all of a sudden, because he finally found a space to get it all designed and he couldn't wait for the architect, couldn't wait for him. So he showed me this plan that he said he himself drew up. And when I looked at it and I measured and I said, do you realize that your two people that are sitting behind the reception desk, they have a 2 foot by 3 foot space. So literally they could back up, turn, that's it. You can't move. I said, I wouldn't want to work in that space. Like, no, it's not feasible. So anyway, we fixed it, but I have a lot of blueprints to choose from. And then this is your new blueprint. And I believe I sent you, I emailed you pictures of those elevated desks today, which are super cool. And that's the thing. I've seen so many offices and so many different places that I can kind of just make suggestions. And that's, I thought it's a really cool idea.
Yeah. So going through the process of taking over this practice and planning for a renovation of just one space. I mean, this is a 2,603 square foot office. And it's not even being built from scratch. It's literally just a top to bottom renovation. Don't get me wrong. It's a huge undertaking, but it's still not building it from scratch. And the number of details that my wife and I have had to think about is just unbelievable. And we have a very good interior designer helping us navigate a lot of those ergonomics things and little design details that make a difference from a patient perspective. But thinking about location of cabinets, thinking about whether or not you need sinks in your exam rooms. I mean, where your speakers are going to be located if you're going to pipe in music, and where your nurse's station is going to be located relative to where people are sitting and moving. I mean, all these little factors are things you get to think about if it's your office space. And whether you're leasing or purchasing the office space, you're going to have to put a lot of thought into it. And it's the kind of thing where experience is probably what pays the most dividends. So if you've never gone through this before, that's where folks like Cindy or any doctors who've been through office renovations can really help you navigate a lot of the things to think about.
Yeah, it's funny
Oh, sorry, Ross, sorry to cut you off. Yeah, this is a schematic actually of our pending renovation, which we are finally, after about a year and a half worth of planning and finance discussions and SBA approvals and everything under the sun, we are finally ready to kind of kick this off in April. We've already had all of our windows replaced, but now they're going to start doing all the dirty work. And it's about a 5-month renovation. It's a huge job. They're going to do it in stages to where we don't have to shut the office down. So we'll have several functional exam rooms while the other half of the office is being done, and then they're going to trade places. So it'll be interesting, but we're ready and we're not going anywhere. We're going to, hopefully have a long, fruitful career where we're at. And this is just one of our 2 offices. So we're very excited.
And so patience is key, because I always find that, especially with even a shell space that's nothing, whatever they say as the time they'll need to complete the project, just multiply it by 3.
Yeah.
Just multiply it by 3, because they may be able to complete the work in a reasonable amount of time, but there's material shortages, and materials cost way more than they ever did before. But then you're relying on some guy, just usually one, that comes out like from the town to give you your certificate of occupancy. And there's always some holiday that runs into it, that like, oh, he can't get out there, and then he's sick and he's on vacation, and there's always something. So be very, very patient. It's funny when I look back at all the pictures from the offices, the startups that I've helped over the years, they all have like my touch in it somewhere. They're all very neutral, modern, like very similar flooring, very similar wall colors, with like maybe a pop of color in the chairs or something. But the more I look at them, I'm like, oh yeah, these all look the same. But they're nice and they're simple and they're clean. So whatever you're leaning towards, work from an ample timeline. I'm going to say a year. Okay. Set realistic expectations, and the grass isn't always greener, which generally means just don't compare yourself to your colleagues and how much they were offered to work at a hospital and they got a sign-on bonus. And maybe that sign-on bonus stopped after year 1. And now they have really unrealistic expectations for the patient volume and how much they're working them and charting and everything else that they want them to get done. So just compare you to you and go with your own goals. So, well, this was longer than we expected, but there's just so much to talk about here, and we could go on this topic forever, and especially about marketing new practices. So maybe we'll do that in the future, but thank you for having me. And here's my information, Cindy at pinnaclepa.com, and my website is pinnaclepa.com. And here's Dr. Schwibish's information. His email is david311@me.com. Is 311 your birthday, or is it because you like that band from your junior high?
A little bit of both. A little bit of, yeah.
All right. And his cell phone is also listed here. But again, thank you. And are there any other chat questions?
Cindy and Dr. Schweibish, we have questions in the chat.
Okay. So the first question about credentialing and hospital privileging, we answered that. There's an unrelated question about if podiatrists are allowed to dispense medical marijuana cards.
Yeah, great question. So yeah, so unfortunately, the general, the gist of that is that no, podiatrists cannot simply, And there are actually some states where I know that this is kind of like pending legislation, and it's a very, very hot button topic. I don't know of any states where I know of a podiatrist that actually has the ability to do this. But there are some states where there's a little bit of a gray area because we obviously treat things like neuropathy, we treat chronic pain, and there's some crossover because of this. In the state of Florida, we do not. But in other states, I don't know, Cindy, do you have any knowledge of other states where you know of some docs who are?
Well, yes, but it would be in places where there's an MD employed in the practice. So that's a whole different ballgame.
Whole different thing. Yeah. So you're basically kind of going underneath another doctor's license to do it, or it's a group entity where you can kind of get away with it. Yeah. But individually in private practice, and especially in Florida, it's not being done. I will tell you from firsthand experience, knowing some folks who do this, that you would not particularly want to. I don't think it's all it's cracked up to be, because a lot of the doctors who do this on a regular basis deal with some pretty difficult patients, and I don't know that it's particularly lucrative. There's a lot of, I don't know, it's not what it's cracked up to be. So, but it's a very valid question, and I think that as time goes on and we pass further legislation, we start to bridge more of the gap of parity, if you will, that'll probably be something it'll fall into line in time. So.
There's a question, when is a good time to introduce yourself to the podiatrists that are near your new practice location? They're older podiatrists that do not do rear foot as well.
That's a good question. So I'm assuming you're probably referring to if you were employed or whatever in private practice or employed, and you want to introduce yourself to some doctors as a way to kind of, like you said, potentially get referrals for patients that they otherwise might not want to care for themselves. Yeah, private practice. So we've done this. We have had the benefit, at least in the state of Florida, that through our state association, we hold regular component meetings, which is basically divided up, throughout the state of Florida, almost into regions or counties. And so the doctors in our community, at least in our area in Brevard County, are very much a tight-knit group. I mean, we get together quarterly to have a dinner and kind of discuss some of the issues that are pertinent to maybe the hospital or some of the things surgically we're dealing with, or some of the trends, legislatively that are affecting us in the state of Florida. So at those meetings is typically where a lot of us will get to know each other, and where the younger doctors, me being the component president for Brevard County, I will introduce myself to the younger doctors, invite them to the meetings. And that's typically where these, folks coming out of fellowship who have, very extensive training, or out of residency with very extensive training, will meet some of these older doctors who do no rear foot work whatsoever. And some of them don't even do any surgery at all. Where they realize, hey, listen, you're just a few miles away from me. I don't do surgery. I don't like doing XYZ. You seem like you've got your head on your shoulders. I'd be happy to kind of keep you in mind. And then it's a matter of not only, getting those patients in your door, but earning the trust of that patient and sustaining it. So one doctor in particular, who's in a community that we opened up our second office in, he's in that boat. He's getting close to retirement. He does not do any surgery. He does not do any ankle work whatsoever. And early on, he kind of tested the waters. He sent us a couple of patients just out of the blue, knowing that we were kind of in his backyard. And right after we received them, we reached out to him. We were very appreciative, very grateful for the almost the humble honor of being able to see a patient at his request. And we kept that doctor informed about the progress of the patient. We sent over progress notes. We made sure that he was kept abreast of what care we provided. And if that patient had routine care needs or basic wound care needs, we made sure to send that patient back to the other doctor to let him know that we weren't stealing that patient. So, to answer your question about a good time to do it, you have to do it with some grace. You have to do it with some humility, because you don't want to come across as the new kid on the block who's a hotshot who thinks that he can do anything better than everybody else. But I would really advise that if you have a doctor who's close by who does not do that kind of work, try to find a different inroad rather than just calling them out of the blue and saying, hey, I'm this guy down the street. I can do XYZ if you don't. Going to association meetings, going to conferences, and instead running into the doctor that way and having almost like a happenstance conversation is far more fluid and really a lot more graceful at the end of the day. And I think it'll pay more dividends when you do it in the right way rather than doing it quickly.
Yeah, I mean, that's good. And hopefully that other doctor is part of these, organizations and groups and does go to meetings, and otherwise you're going to have to get more creative about how you meet them. But as a new practitioner, no matter what you're doing, you're there to help. You're there to help referring providers. You're there to help providers that don't provide the same types of services and surgical correction that you do. You're there to help the community. You're there to educate in any way that you can. And again, it's relationships in the beginning. It's not about money. So if you're in it for day one, I want to start making money, that's all I care about, go work for a hospital, and that's it. But it takes time to build up those relationships.
It does, yeah. And actually starting off, you're going to have way more success if you, instead of approaching other podiatrists in the area, if you contact primary care doctors and urgent care centers. That's the road that we went. I mean, we set up lunches, lunch and learns, if you will, with a lot of the primary care doctors in our area. And it's amazing how antiquated that is. They were like, wow, we haven't had a young doctor come and bring us lunch and talk to us about what they do, which is funny because a lot of the old school doctors, that's what was very common in their generation. So you'll stand out if you contact a primary care doctor and say, hey, I'm a new podiatrist in town. I'd like to buy your office lunch. You pay the 50, 80, $100 to buy the 5 or 6 people in the office lunch, showcase what you do. And if you do it the right way and you do it with the right tact, that can open up a floodgate like you would not believe.
And we have to do it in a concise way because they don't have a ton of time. So
yeah, it's like an elevator pitch.
Yeah, don't be long-winded. Just you're there to help you treat XYZ conditions, and here you go, call you. You can see patients same day, next day. And the one other thing I think that we should wrap up with is when you're first starting out, you do need to do those things that make yourself stand out from the crowd, stand out from the rest of the podiatrists in the area. So some of my practices have started calling new patients at the end of the day, calling any patient who had a procedure or a surgery, and just saying like, hi, this is Cindy from Coast and Soul Foot and Ankle Specialists. Just calling to make sure that everything went okay today and that all your questions were answered. And patients don't even have any questions because they're like, wow, really? The doctor really cares like how I'm doing or that I understood what he was saying. And it makes a big difference. It's again, those relationships, the extra mile. And as a new doctor, new practice, you don't have a lot of money. And so that's free. Like making a phone call like that is free. Going to visit other referring doctors is free. You don't even have to do the lunch thing. Go and pick up some bagels and coffee and let it cost you $30 instead of $100. Right. It's the gesture. It's your time.
Yeah. My first 6 months in practice, every single new patient I saw, I wrote them a handwritten thank you note. I would send it by mail, and it was
no one could read it, but it was the sentiment that counted.
Yeah. I was very careful. I promise. I was very careful, but no, that's true. But I did it, and eventually it became very burdensome, and we had good patient flow coming in, so I did stop it, unfortunately. But it was something that for a lot of people counted for a lot, and it's where we got a lot of word of mouth referrals just from that alone. So.
Right.
But anyhow, so any other questions before we conclude? I know we are getting late, but we really appreciate everyone sticking around for as long as you did. I think that kind of shows that some of you on the call probably have a pretty sincere interest in going into private practice. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me or Cindy. You can text me, you can email me, you can reach out to Cindy. She's very approachable. And we're happy to help you navigate through any of these issues or questions you might have as we move forward. So this will be the first of many more young physician, young member webinars to come on a lot of different topics. So, stay tuned, watch for your emails, watch for Facebook posts.
I will say, oh, we did have another chat question, but I will say that I'm planning on attending the national meeting in Orlando this summer. So whether it's formal or not, I would like to maybe arrange something, and any of the people that are on this webinar, if they want to get together somehow like at the hotel or off premises, whatever, that we could have a discussion like this, I'd be more than open to it since I'll be there. And while I'm there, we might as well.
Sounds like a great idea. No, definitely. I'll be there. So,
Excellent.
all right. Well, if there's no other questions, I don't think we do. Yeah. Thank you all for joining and for sticking around. Have a great evening. And please do not hesitate to reach out. Okay. All right. Y'all take care and have a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you.